CHAPTER X of Recollections of a Missionary in the Great West by Cyrus Townsend Brady. Recording is in the public domain. The love of Christmas is as strong in the West as it is in any section of the country, perhaps indeed stronger, for people who have few pleasures cherish holidays more highly than those for whom many cheap amusements are provided. But when the manifestation of the Christmas spirit is considered, there is a vast difference between the West and the East. There are vast sections of country in which evergreens do not grow, and to which it would not pay to ship them. Consequently, Christmas trees are not common, and therefore much prized when they may be had. There are no great rows, nor small clusters of inviting shops filled with suggestive and fascinating contents at attractive prices. The distances from centers of trade are so great that the things which may be purchased even in the smallest towns in more favorable localities for a few cents have there almost a prohibitive price upon them. The efforts of the people to give their children a Merry Christmas in the popular sense, however, are strong and sometimes pitiful. It must not be forgotten that the West is settled by Eastern people, and that no very great difference exists between them, save for the advantages presented by life in the West for the higher development of character. Western people are usually brighter, quicker, more progressive and less conservative, and more liberal than those from whom they came. The survival of the fittest is the rule out there, and the qualities of character necessary to that end are brought to the top in the strenuous life necessitated by the hardships of the frontier. If the people are not any better than they were, it is because they are still clinging to the obsolete ideas of the East. The Eastern point of view always reminds me of the reply of the bishop to the layman who was deploring the poor quality of the clergy. "Yes," says the bishop, "some of them are poor, but consider the stock from which they come. You see, we have nothing but laymen out of which to make them." The East never understands the West, the real West, that is, which lies beyond the Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Rocky Mountains. They know nothing of its ideas, its capacities, its possibilities, its educational facilities, its culture, its real power in the East. And they do not wish to learn, apparently. The Easterners fatuously think, like Job, that they are the people and wisdom will die with them. Some years since, an article in the Forum on the theme "Kansas More Civilized Than New York" conclusively proved the proposition to the satisfaction of the present writer at least. I sat at a dinner table one day when the salted almonds were handed me with the remark, "I suppose you never saw anything like these out West. Try some." And my wife was quite gravely asked if we feared any raids by the Indians, and if they troubled us by their marauding in Kansas. I have found it necessary to inform the curious that we did not live in teepees or wigwams in Nebraska. One day I was talking with a man, and a very stupid man at that, who informed me that he graduated from Harvard, to which surprising statement he added the startling information, for the benefit of my presumably untutored Occidental mind, that it was a college near Boston. They have everything in the West that the East has so far as their sometimes limited means will provide them, and when they have no money they have patience, endurance, grim determination, and courage, which are better than money in the long run. The cities, and smaller towns especially, as a rule are cleaner, better governed, more progressive, better provided with improvements and comforts than corresponding places in the East. Scarcely a community exists without its waterworks, electric light plant, telephone system, trolleys, paved streets, etc. Of course, this does not apply to the extreme frontier, in which my field of work largely lay. The conditions were different there. The people, too. But to return to Christmas. One Christmas Day I left my family at 1:00 in the morning. Christmas salutations were exchanged at that very sleepy hour, and I took the fast express to a certain station, whence I could drive up country to a little church on a farm in which there had never been a Christmas service. It was a bitter cold morning, deep snow on the ground, and a furious north wind raging. The climate is variable indeed out West. I have spent Christmas days on which it rained all day, and of all days in the year on which to have it rain, Christmas is the worst. Still, the farmers would be thankful. It was usually safe to be thankful out there whenever it rained. I knew a man once who said you could make a fortune by always betting 2-to-1 that it would not rain, no matter what the present promise of the weather was. You were bound to win 9 times out of 10. I hired a good sleigh and 2 horses and drove to my destination. The church was a little old brick building right out in the prairie. There was a smoldering fire and a miserable worn-out stove, which hardly raised the temperature of the room a degree, although it filled the place with smoke. The wind had free entrance through the ill-fitting window and door frames, and a little pile of snow formed on the altar during the service. I think there were 12 people who had braved the fury of the storm. There was not an evergreen within 100 miles of the place, and the only decoration was sagebrush. To wear vestments was impossible, and I conducted the service in a buffalo overcoat and a fur cap and gloves, as I have often done. It was short, and the sermon was shorter. After service I went to dinner at the nearest farmhouse. Such a Christmas dinner it was! There was no turkey, and they did not even have a chicken. The menu was cornbread, ham, and potatoes, and few potatoes at that. There were 2 children in the family, a girl of 6 and a boy of 5. They were glad enough to get the ham. Their usual bill of fare was composed of potatoes and cornbread, and sometimes cornbread alone. My wife had put up a lunch for me, fearing that I might not be able to get anything to eat, in which there was a small mince pie turnover; and the children had slipped a small box of candy in my bag as a Christmas gift. I produced the turnover, which by common consent was divided between the astonished children. Such a glistening of eyes and smacking of small lips you never saw. "This pie makes it seem like Christmas after all," said the little girl, with her mouth full. "Yes," said the boy ditto, "that and the ham." "We didn't have any Christmas this year," continued the small maiden. "Last year mother made us some potato men," i.e., little animal and semi-human figures made out of potatoes and matches, with buttons for eyes. They go into many stockings among the very poor out West. "But this year," interrupted the boy, "potatoes are so scarce that we couldn't have 'em. Mother says that next year perhaps we will have some real Christmas." They were so brave about it that my heart went out to them. Children and no Christmas gifts! Only the chill, bare room, the wretched, meagre meal. I ransacked my brain. Finally something occurred to me. After dinner I excused myself and hurried back to the church. There were 2 baskets there which were used for the collection. Old, but rather pretty. I selected the best one. Fortunately I had in my grip a neat little housewife, which contained a pair of scissors, a huge thimble, needles, thread, a tiny little pincushion, an emery bag, buttons, etc. I am like most ex-sailors, something of a needleman myself. I emptied the contents into the collection basket, and garnished the dull little affair with the bright ribbon ties ripped off the housewife, and went back to the house. To the boy I gave my penknife, which happened to be nearly new, and to the girl the church basket with the sewing things for a work basket. The joy of those children was one of the finest things I have ever witnessed. The face of the little girl was positively filled with awe as she lifted from the basket, one by one, the pretty and useful articles the housewife had supplied; and when I added the small box of candy that my children had provided me, they looked at me with feelings of reverence, almost as a visible incarnation of Santa Claus. They were the cheapest and most effective Christmas presents it was ever my pleasure to bestow. I hope to be forgiven for putting the church furniture to such a secular use. Another Christmas Day I had a funeral. There was no snow, no rain. The day was warm. The woman who had died had been the wife of one of the largest farmers in the diocese. He actually owned a continuous body of several thousand acres of fine land, much of it under cultivation. She had been a fruitful mother, and 5 stalwart sons, all married, and several daughters likewise, with numerous grandchildren, represented her contribution to the world's population. They were the people of the most consideration in the little community in which they lived. We had the services in the morning in the Methodist Church, which was big enough to hold about 600 people. As it was a holiday, it was filled to the very doors. One of my farmer friends remarked, as we stood on the front steps watching the crowd assembling, "My, Doc, all of them wagons gathering here makes it seem more like circus day than a funeral." I had been asked to preach a sermon, which I essayed to do. The confusion was terrific. In order to be present themselves, the mothers in Israel had been obliged to bring their children, and the most domestic of all attentions were being bestowed upon them freely. They cried and wailed and expostulated with their parents in audible tones until I was nearly frantic. I found myself shouting consoling platitudes to a sobbing, grief-stricken band of relatives, and endeavoring to drown the noise of the children by roaring, "The lion's part a la bottom." It was distracting. I was a very young minister at the time, and the perspiration fairly rained from me. That's what makes me remember it was a warm day. When we got through the services, after every one of the 600 had, in the language of the local undertaker, viewed the remains, we went to the cemetery. I rode behind a horse which was 38 years old. I do not know what his original color had been, but at present he was white and hoary with age. "I always use him for funerals," said the undertaker, "because he naturally sets the proper pace for a funeral procession." "Mercy," said I hope he won't die on the road." "Well, if he does," continues the undertaker, "your services will come in handy. We can bury him proper. I am awfully fond of that horse. I shouldn't wonder if he hadn't been at as many as 1,000 funerals in his life." I thought he had all the gravity of his gruesome experiences, especially in his gait. The Christmas dinners were all late on account of the funeral, but they were bountiful and good nevertheless, and I much enjoyed mine. Another Christmas I was snowbound on one of the obscure branches of a Western railroad. If the train had been on time I would have made a connection and have reached home by Christmas Eve, but it was very evident as the day wore on that it was not going to be on time. Indeed, it was problematical whether it would get anywhere at all. It was snowing hard outside. Our progress had become slower and slower. Finally, in a deep cut, we stopped. There were 3 men, 1 woman, and 2 little children in the car, no other passengers in the train. The train was of that variety known out West as a plug, consisting of a combination baggage and smoker and 1 coach. One of the trainmen started on a lonely and somewhat dangerous tramp of several miles up the road to the next station to call for the snow plow, and the rest of us settled down to spend the night. Certainly we could not hope to be extricated before the next evening, especially as the storm then gave no signs of abating. We all went up to the front of the car and sat around the stove, in which we kept up a bright fire. Fortunately we had plenty of fuel, and in such circumstances we speedily got acquainted with each other. One of the men was a drummer, a traveling man for a notion house. Another was a cowboy, the third was a big cattleman, and I was the last. We soon found that the woman was a widow, who had maintained herself and the children precariously since the death of her husband by sewing and other feminine odd jobs, but had at last given up the unequal struggle, and was going back to live with her mother, also a widow, who had some little property. The poor little threadbare children had cherished anticipation of a joyous Christmas with their grandmother. From their talk we could hear that a Christmas tree had been promised them, and all sorts of things. They were intensely disappointed at the blockade. They cried and sobbed and would not be comforted. Fortunately the woman had a great basket filled with substantial provisions, which by the by she generously shared with the rest of us, so we were none of us hungry. As the night fell we tipped up 2 of the seats, placed the bottoms sideways, and with our overcoats made 2 good beds for the little folks. Just before they went to sleep the drummer said to me, "Say, parson, we've got to give these children some Christmas." "That's what," said the cowboy. "I'm agreed," added the cattleman. "Madam," said the drummer, addressing the woman with the easy assurance of his class, after a brief consultation between us, "we are going to give your kids some Christmas." The woman beamed at him gratefully. "Yes, children," said the now enthused drummer, as he turned to the open-mouthed children, "Santa Claus is coming round to night, sure. We want you to hang up your stockings." "We ain't got none," quivered the little girl, "'ceptin' those we've got on, and Ma says it's too cold to take 'em off." "I've got 2 new pair of woolen socks," said the cattleman eagerly, "which I ain't never wore, and you are welcome to 'em." There was a clapping of little hands in childish glee, and then the 2 faces fell as the elder remarked, "But Santa Claus will know they are not our stockings, and he will fill them with things for you instead." "Lord love you," said the burly cattleman, roaring with infectious laughter, "he won't bring me nothin'. One of us will sit up anyway and tell him it's for you. You've got to hustle to bed right away, because he may be here any time now." Then came one of those spectacles which we sometimes meet once or twice in a lifetime. The children knelt down on the rough floor of the car beside their improvised beds. Instinctively the hands of the men went to their heads, and at the first word of "Now I lay me down to sleep," 4 hats came off. The cowboy stood twirling his hat and looking at the little kneeling figures. The cattleman's vision seemed dimmed, while in the eyes of the traveling man there shone a distant look, a look across snow-filled prairies to a warmly lighted home. The children were soon asleep. Then the rest of us engaged in earnest conversation. What should we give them, was the question. "It don't seem to me that I've got anything to give 'em," said the cowboy mournfully, "unless the little kid might like my spurs. And I would give my gun to the little girl, though on general principles I don't like to give up a gun. You never know when you're going to need it, 'specially with strangers," he added, with a rather suspicious glance at me. I would not have harmed him for the world. "I'm in much the same fix," said the cattleman. "I've got a flask of prime old whiskey here, but it don't seem like it's very appropriate for the occasion, though it's at the service of any of you gents." "Never seen no occasion in which whiskey wa'n't appropriate," said the cowboy, mellowing at the sight of the flask. "I mean it ain't fit for kids," explained the cattleman, handing it over. "I begun on it rather early," remarked the puncher, taking a long drink, "and I always use it when my feelin's is unsettled, like now." He handed it back with a sigh. "Never mind, boys," said the drummer. "You all come along with me to the baggage car." So off we trooped. He opened his trunks and spread before us such a glittering array of trash and trinkets as almost took away our breath. "There," he said, "look at that. We'll just pick out the best things from the lot, and I'll donate them all." "No, you don't," said the cowboy. "My auntie's in on this game, and I'm going to buy what chips I want, and pay for 'em, too, else there ain't going to be no Christmas around here." "That's my judgment, too," said the cattleman. "I think that will be fair," said I. "The traveling man can donate what he pleases, and we can each of us buy what we please as well." I think we spent hours looking over the stock which the obliging man spread out all over the car for us. He was going home, he said, and everything was at our service. The trainman caught the infection, too, and all hands finally went back to the coach with such a load of stuff as you never saw before. We filled the socks, and the 2 seats besides, with it. The grateful mother was simply dazed. As we stood about, gleefully surveying our handiwork, including the bulging socks, the engineer remarked, "We've got to get some kind of a Christmas tree." So 2 of us plowed off on the prairie (it had stopped snowing and was bright moonlight) and wandered around till we found a good sized piece of sagebrush, which we brought back and solemnly installed, and the woman decorated it with bunches of tissue paper from the notion stock and clean waste from the engine. We hung the train lanterns around it. We were so excited that we actually could not sleep. The contagion of the season was strong upon us, and I know not which were the more delighted the next morning, the children or the amateur Santa Clauses, when they saw what the cowboy called the "layout." Great goodness! Those children never did have, and probably never will have, such a Christmas again. And to see the thin face of that mother flush with unusual color when we handed her one of those monstrous red plush albums which we had purchased jointly, and in which we had all written our names in lieu of our photographs, and between the leaves of which the cattleman had generously slipped $100 bill, was worth being blockaded for a dozen Christmases. Her eyes filled with tears, and she fairly sobbed before us. During the morning we had a little service in the car, in accordance with the custom of the church, and I am sure no more heartfelt body of worshippers ever poured forth their thanks for the incarnation than those men, that woman, and the little children. The woman sang "Jesus, Lover of My Soul" from memory in her poor little voice, and that small but reverent congregation, cowboy, drummer, cattleman, trainman, and parson, solemnly joined in. "It feels just like church," said the cowboy, gravely, to the cattleman. "Say, I'm all broke up. Let's go in the other car and try your flask again." It was his unfailing resource for unsettled feelings. The train hand, who had gone on to division headquarters, returned with the snowplow early in the afternoon, but what was more to the purpose, he brought a whole cooked turkey with him, so the children had turkey, a Christmas tree, and Santa Claus to their hearts' content. I did not get home until the day after Christmas. But after all, what a Christmas I had enjoyed. During a season of great privation we were much assisted by barrels of clothing which were sent to us from the East. One day, just before Christmas, I was distributing the contents of several barrels of wearing apparel and other necessities to the women and children at a little mission. The delight of the women, as the good warm articles of clothing for themselves and their children, which they so sadly needed, were handed out to them, was touching. But the children themselves did not enter into the joy of the occasion with the same spontaneity. Finally, just as I got to the bottom of one box, and before I had opened the other one, a little boy, sniffling to himself in the corner, remarked sotto voce, "Ain't there no real Christmas gifts in there for us little fellers, too?" I could quite enter into his feelings, for I could remember in my youthful days when careful relatives had provided me with a cardigan jacket, 3 handkerchiefs, and a half-dozen pairs of socks for Christmas, that the season seemed to me like a hollow mockery, and the attempt to palm off necessities as Christmas gifts filled my childish heart with disapproval. I am older now, and can face a Christmas remembrance of a cook book, a silver cake basket, or an ice cream freezer, some of which I have actually received, with philosophical equanimity, if not gratitude. I opened the second box, therefore, with a great longing, though but little hope. Heaven bless the women who had packed that box, for in addition to the usual necessary articles, there were dolls, knives, books, games galore, so that the small fry had some real Christmas gifts as well as the others. After one of the blizzards, a young ranchman, who had gone into the nearest town, came 20 miles away to get some Christmas things for his wife and little ones, was found frozen to death on Christmas morning, his poor little packages of petty Christmas gifts, tightly clasped in his cold hands, lying by his side. His horse was frozen, too, and when they found it, hanging to the horn of the saddle, was a little piece of an evergreen tree. You would throw it away in contempt in the East. It was so puny. There it meant something, the love of Christmas. It was there in his dead hands, the spirit of Christmas. It showed itself in that bit of verdant pine over the lariat at the saddle bow of the poor bronco. Do they have Christmas out West? Well, they have it in their hearts, if no place else, and after all, that is the place above all others where it should be. End of Chapter 10